Hi folks, today we're going to be talking about another one of my favorite mysteries from childhood, and that would be the Loch Ness Monster, here on Lessons from the Purple Chair. Hi, welcome back to Lessons from the Purple Chair, one intellectual's musings from the comfort of a big purple wingback. I'm your host, Professor Timothy R. Crow. Now, if you've been watching my channel, then you know that the first video that I put out here at the Purple Chair was about my childhood obsession with Bigfoot, and we went over Bigfoot. Well, I also had another cryptid that I was fascinated with at the same time, and that would, of course, have been Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. I got both of these from watching episodes of In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And I was absolutely convinced, just like with Bigfoot, that the Loch Ness Monster was real. I had the surgeon's photo, that black and white photo of the head and neck that was right there, big and alive, to show me that there was a living dinosaur in the murky waters of Loch Ness up in the Scottish Highlands. Of course, I've since grown up, and with more education and maturity, I've become much more critical of this claim of a monster in that lake. But let's go over it. Now, first, we'll talk about the lake itself. Loch Ness is actually the largest of the Highland lochs. It is about 22.5 miles long, and its widest point, it's about just a little over 1.5 miles wide. The depth experiments have shown it to be about 780 feet deep at its deepest point. However, there is some people that believe that in some of the underground crevices and valleys, it may actually go down to 900 feet. Which that would be so. This is a big lake. This is a great big lake. Also, the lake is very murky because of all the peat that drains in from the river. The rivers that drain into Loch Ness, and they bring down this peat. It makes the water very murky, and you cannot see more than about 9 feet below the surface. It's just a big, dark, murky lake. With the highlands around it and the fog settle in, it can be a very creepy, eerie place where you would expect to see something, primordial or something bestial out there in that foggy lake. And in fact, the ancient Picts and Celts cultures had a lot of mythologies about water creatures, that were being lakes. They actually saw lakes and rivers and ponds as places that were connected with the underworld, the world of the dead and the magical world of the gods. So, and there was also some pretty fantastic creatures they believed in. One of the most common was what was known as a water Kelpie. Now, water Kelpie was basically this horse-like water being that it's kind of like a siren or a mermaid. It would entice people to ride it, and once you got on, you couldn't get off. You were stuck to it, and it would dive to the depths to drown you, and was possibly even even predatory. It would eat you. So these were scary, fantastical beasts, probably brought on from seeing this dark and murky and mysterious water. Or maybe it's based on something else. But the legend of a monster in that lake, or a creature living in Loch Ness, stretches back to the first recorded incident of in about 560 A.D. when Saint Columba. There was a story of Saint Columba saving a follower of his who was swimming across this lake, and he was about to be attacked by this water beast, this water monster. And it said he'd give the sign of the cross and told it to be gone, and it recounts that it was like being pulled back by invisible ropes, and he saved his follower, and it was seen as a miracle. And so that story actually may have influenced the sightings later on, or you could take it from the other side and say this was the first sighting. Matters how you want to look at it. However, the real legend of the monster of Loch Ness, which will become known as Nessie, came about in the 1930s. Now, during that time, before the loch was surrounded by a lot of trees and not good road system, when they suddenly opened a highway, a road that went all the way around the lake, suddenly there were a lot more people in and around the lake, traffic in and around the lake. They could see into the loch, and all of a sudden there's these sightings of something in that lake. Started popping up. Now, one of the first was two hotel workers in May of 1933 claimed to have seen some sort of creature, some sort of disturbance in the loch. It was actually reported in the Inverness newspaper. But then again, in July of that same year, a gentleman named George Fisher claimed to have seen something crossing the road from the loch and going towards the loch. Some sort of strange beach, which he said was only about 50 feet from his car. Him and his wife both saw this thing. His name was George Spicer. I said Fisher, Spicer. George Spicer. That's my correction. But this was also put in the newspaper, and when this hit the news, it went all over, and suddenly there was like, what is this thing? Is there a beast in Loch Ness? Is there a creature in Loch Ness? And other people started reporting seeing strange humps in the lake, seeing strange waves in the lake, or even seeing some sort of creature with a long serpent-like neck that would appear up out of the lake and then plunge away. Well, a particular newspaper, people become so intrigued, they actually hired a big game hunter, or at least he claimed to be. He was a bit extravagant, loved publicity, to come in and hunt down the beast. His name was Marmaduke Weatherall. Of course he was. Marmaduke Weatherall. You gotta love that name. If that doesn't scream adventure and big game hunter, I don't know what does. But he was also a little bit slick, and he claimed that he found some tracks on the on the edge of the lake, showing where this creature went in. These big tracks, and he made casts of them, and this really hit the newspaper. However, when they were sent to some of the labs, that was busted pretty quick, because it come to find out that they were identical to a hippopotamus footprint. And in fact, come to find out that Weatherall had a hippopotamus foot that had been made into an ashtray. Things like the ashtrays and umbrella stands were pretty common uses for hippos, which is kind of grim today, but that's true. So he was busted, and he was humiliated, and he just and he was fired from the newspaper because of the humiliation, and he was out. However, within about a year, in 1934, the famous surgeon's photo of the head and neck in that lake appeared. Supposedly taken by a man named Robert Wilson, a very highly respected London surgeon. And because of his reputation, people were like, why would such a respectable doctor, go out on a limb and fake something like this? So it was believed to be a real, authentic photo. And this photo became iconic. This, for everyone, is the Loch Ness Monster. It was in every book, it was in every newspaper, it was in every documentary for decades, for over 50 years. This was the Loch Ness Monster. And there's no doubt that this is either fake, or it has to be some sort of unknown creature in that lake that looks very much like a dinosaur. So suddenly, now the Nessie thing really blew up. And actually, that wasn't the first picture. There was an earlier picture, but it really didn't show a lot. It looks more like just some sort of strange wave in the water. But with the surgeon's photo, that's one that really sealed it. It was fairly clear, a little murky, but fairly clear black and white shot. Either way, suddenly more reports started coming in. People seeing big humps in the water that would submerge, sometimes 30, 40 feet long. Seeing the head and the neck. And this was all throughout the 30s and the 40s. In the 40s, there wasn't a lot, mostly because of World War II. However, in the 60s, the interest popped back up again, and one of the more famous big Loch Ness Monster hunters was Tim Dinsdale, and actually met Tim Dinsdale back in the mid 80s, not long before he died in 87. He did a book tour, and I actually met him in a bookstore. Very nice man, but he spent 2 decades on that lake looking for the Loch Ness Monster. Apparently, he had one sighting where he claimed he'd seen head and neck just for a few seconds, pop up, went down, come back up, pop, went back down again, and it just absolutely changed his life. He spent, like I said, 2 decades on that lake hunting for the Loch Ness Monster. However, in 1960, he did manage to capture a very interesting film, very grainy, black and white, of what looks like some sort of hump going across the lake. Experts at the time looked at it and said they believed that it was animate, that it was not a boat, they couldn't see any pop wash, and they thought that this was likely a living animal. So it was animate, it was alive. And it had to be at least 3 feet out of the water, and estimated to have at least a foot below. And suddenly, now you had film proof of the Loch Ness Monster. And then in the 1970s, there was another gentleman, Robert Rhine, an American who was with a scientific, who was a professor, a scientific professor, and he came to the lake and he brought a radar, and not only radar, but he also brought strobe light cameras that could go under the water and take pictures. So suddenly they started tracking any type of radar signals they found in that lake, and with the cameras in tow, with the lights, whenever it would be activated by the radar. And he came up with at least 3 very interesting photos that convinced a lot of people. One was what looked like a giant fin. Now remember, there's nothing really larger in that lake than perhaps some sturgeon, and actually there's not a large fish population in that lake. But this large fin definitely looked like it come from a large animal. This underwater picture of a fin. A lot of people were completely convinced. Now we do have the Loch Ness Monster. And then also another one that looks like a body, fins, and a long neck that was captured underwater. And finally, there was one where apparently he claimed that whatever this creature was had hit the rig, flipped it up, and took a picture of the boat, and then caught this image of what looks like what they call the gargoyle head. And this rather frightening looking photo was the result. Now, this really convinced a lot of people at the time, and this was in 1975, that there was a Loch Ness Monster. Here's your proof. However, they come to find out that the fin photo had been really retouched, basically out of this kind of scrambled looking, which you can't tell what it'd be anything. They had kind of airbrushed out to make it look more like a fin. However, you see the original photo, it could very easily just be stirred up peat from the bottom of the lake swirling around and caught by the camera. Also, even the head pictures come under question. So a lot of people saw this as suddenly it kind of diffused a lot of the proof. And that was pretty much, the proof at the time. Now, one of the biggest theories was that this was a prehistoric plesiosaur, which was a dinosaur that looked very much like what people were describing. Large body, long tail, flippers, long neck, small head. And a lot of people thought that a plesiosaur was now living in the lake. It may have been got caught in that lake from when Loch Ness was possibly open to the ocean, and that's the way it got in. That this had originally been like a sea serpent, that lived at sea and got trapped in the lake. So this was the speculations as to what what it was. And there have been so many expeditions with submarines and infrared cameras underwater, people diving. And the problem is with that lake, it's so big, so deep, and with so much of the peat in the water, and it's such dark water, you could get that thing. If there was something down, it could swim within 10 feet of you and you wouldn't see it, because it's just such a dark lake. But they keep hunting, and all these radar sensors and every type of technology they can throw at it. And in all this time, since the 1930s, going on 100 years now, just short of 100 years, people are still hunting for the Loch Ness Monster, and he's yet to be found. Now let's talk a little bit about the real realities of this. Now first, we'll talk about the greatest proof for the Loch Ness Monster, the most famous one of them all, and that being the surgeon's photo from 1934 that shows the prominent head and neck of the Loch Ness Monster. It is the image we all have of the Loch Ness Monster, like I said. However, and this image stood up, like I said, for over 50 years. This was the known image of the Loch Ness Monster. However, in 1991, the bubble was burst, because it come to find out that this was a hoax. In fact, it's a very ingenious hoax. Simple but ingenious, and has its own little backstory. What had happened was, after Marmaduke Wetherall had been fired and humiliated, he got very angry. He wanted some revenge. So he plotted with his stepson, Christian Sperling, he's like, they want a picture of a Loch Ness Monster. They want a monster in that lake. I'll give them a monster in that lake. So he had his stepson create a head and neck, plastic head and neck of like a dinosaur, that he put on a toy submarine that would submerge just down a few inches below the water. They put that out in the water, and they stood back and they took the picture of it. Which is very simple, but it did the trick. And where the submarine would move, it caused those ripples you see in the photo. And now the photos everybody's familiar with it's cropped from the original. If you look at the original, you can see it's not as impressive. It looks very much closer to, rather than being out in just deep water, looks closer to the shore. And experiments, doing this can be perfectly replicated. And they kept this secret, but they Wetherall, who took the photo, he couldn't turn it in because nobody would have believed it, because he's already been discredited. So both he and his stepson had a friend, this surgeon, Robert Wilson, what people didn't know about him. Yes, he was a respected surgeon, but he loved practical jokes. He's a big joker. He thought things like that were funny. They got him to say he took the picture and turned the picture over to the press. So with his reputation, everybody believed it. So it was a perfect plan, and it's one that stood for over 50 years. However, Christian Sperling finally, when he was in his great elder years before he died, he finally confessed that, probably to clear his conscience. He finally confessed that how this had went down, and that he had created the model of the Loch Ness Monster. And a lot of people said that this was the story that killed the Loch Ness Monster, because suddenly this famous picture is just a toy dinosaur on a toy submarine in the edge of the lake. It's a kid's toy. It's really kind of disheartening to a lot of people. Even though I was in my 20s at the time, I was even I was like, oh, all my life that had been the Loch Ness monster. Now it's just a toy. So, but that's not the only things that popped up that kind of started discrediting the Loch Ness monster's existence. Another was with Tim Dinsdale's film of something going across that lake. A lot of examination has been done with modern camera work and digital work, and it becomes very clear that this was more than likely a person in a small boat crossing the lake. In fact, it's even known that there was a gentleman who went across the loch in a small boat at that time of the day. So this looks, with the blow-ups and all that, you can't see a figure. It looks like a small boat, and most likely is just a small boat. So in fact, I don't think Tim Dinsdale tried to perpetrate a hoax. I think he was at a distance, and what he was seeing, he believed he was filming a creature. It's an easy mistake to make, and that's another thing. When you're looking out across of the loch, and anytime you're looking out water, it's hard to get perspective on things, on what you're looking at. So I think a lot of these sightings are people really believing that they're seeing something odd, and also being fueled by the legend of the Loch Ness monster. They believe, they will interpret things differently than if they saw it in some other lake or even the ocean. So you see something that you quite don't know what it is in Loch Ness, it's the Loch Ness monster. And I think a lot of these sightings are birds. Birds are, flocks of birds flying around the water can look like something going through the water. It's hard to get a perspective. There's one gentleman that was taking a film of what was the greatest, he was thinking of the greatest film of the head and neck of the Loch Ness monster, and then suddenly, as he said, it flapped its wings and flew away. So it's easy to do. Also, sometimes seals do get into the lake, and those can be easily misidentified. The heads popping up, and especially when you're looking at water, it's hard to tell how the scale. So it's hard to tell how big something you're seeing out there is. And a lot of it also could be boat wakes, which is something else I want to talk about. There's a lot of possibilities. Floating logs, have submerged logs bobbing up out of the water. And there's a lot of different things to be misinterpreted. In fact, one of the aspects of that lake that makes it the humps is due to one strange phenomenon, and that is the loch is very sheer-sided on each side. It's almost like a big bathtub. It's very sheer-sided. This where this glacier just sliced right through there, and to create that loch. Now, what happens is if you have a boat go by, then it creates a wave. Well, the wave goes out on both sides. You have those waves go out from both sides. They'll finally spread out and hit the bank. When they do, they'll double back. And when they double back, they hit each other, and they kind of roll over each other. So, and that effect, and that's kind of like this rolling effect all the way down the loch. So if you walked out there, the boat could be, a quarter mile away, and you walk out there, but you'll see this something looks like this undulating, almost hump-like thing in the water, where the water's overlapping. These waves are overlapping themselves. It'd be very easy to be mistaken. And in fact, this other famous photo here of the supposed humps near Urquhart, the ruins of Urquhart Castle, which is an iconic symbol of Loch Ness, and this famous photo. This one is most likely another one of these overlapping waves from a boat that's went by. You can even see some of the lines of the ripples going out from where the boat had went by. So this one looks more like it was this is one of those overlapping waves. Now there's another phenomenon that happens with in that lake, and that is because it is so murky. It's a very cold water lake. However, it gets enough sunlight on the top for about the first 5 or 6 feet. The sun warms up the water, and this is create what's known as a shesh. And a shesh is actually when warmer water is on top of colder water. That mix, it can cause, and the blowing of the wind, it can cause the heated water to move faster than the undercurrent of the cold water. And it will actually cause a wave that will take about 30 hours to cross all the way across the loch. And when it hits, that warm water on top smacks the edge and comes rolling back. But at that point, it's actually going against the wind. So you could very easily say you saw a log out there and floating in that loch, and it's moving, but it'd look like it'd be going against the wind, and a person wouldn't know the hydrodynamics to know that this is actually a shesh. It's being pulled along by this top wave of water, even though the wind's blowing. Looks like it's blowing the water the opposite direction. So that'd be something to easily confuse. Now, as I said, the Rhine photos, underwater photos, the one of the fin had been touched up. I think somebody wasn't really trying to make a hoax, but they were trying to outline what they saw as a fin so people could see it clearly, but they actually kind of more created a fin out of just a swirl of maybe some of the sediment at the bottom being stirred up by the camera. And likewise, the other photos, the famous head and neck underwater shot, it's a little unclear, but it may actually be rising bubbles or sediment, or it may even be a log laying down at the bottom, log or just some clay in a log on the bottom. It's very hard to tell what that is. The structure of it does not look like the dimensions of a living animal. And the famous gargoyle head that was taken the same, around the same time. Actually, in that area, people had noted there is a underwater log, tree stump under there, and it was actually dredged up for a while. And it has a very striking resemblance to that gargoyle. So I think they just got a picture of a log, or possibly even just stirred up sediment at the bottom. You really can't tell what anything is in those pictures. They could just as easily be stirred up sediment, and most likely are. So therefore, then we've got to look at the whole plesiosaur theory. Well, there's a problem there because, one, this was a lake created by a glacier, 12,000 years ago, during the last ice age, whereas plesiosaurs lived 65 million years ago. So, and how would they get into this lake? And they've done some water tests and have not found substantial seawater in this freshwater lake. So therefore, if there's an opening to the ocean, it must be very, very minute. And also another thing with two things about plesiosaurs that rule it out. One, plesiosaurs were much smaller than the creatures that are reported. That's number one. Number two about them is that they were air breathers, and they would have like crocodiles, or hippos, more like crocodiles or alligators. They have to come up for air several times a day. So if there were a population of plesiosaurs in that lake, you'd be seeing their heads you could stand out there on the lake and watch their heads pop up, to get air and go back down, and you could watch them all day just like you would with like alligators or crocodiles. Don't see that. These is obviously an underwater animal. So there's that. And another thing, the descriptions of the Loch Ness monster, like in the famous photo, is that what raises this serpent-like head and neck and looks around. Plesiosaur couldn't do that. Yes, they had a very long neck. However, the neck bones, the spinal neck bones, were actually locked. They could bend down, but they couldn't bend all the way up. So it was very stiff. It couldn't really bend its head much more than this. It definitely wasn't like a snake. The bones locked, so it would not have had this serpent-like neck. so that doesn't fit. So this is not a plesiosaur. So, like I said, I think that outside of just mistaken identity of birds, of the strange hydrodynamics of the waves of Loch Ness, floating logs, supposed to be called in a sesh. But I think also another possible explanation could be eels, which we know there are eels in the loch, and they can get quite long, up to 5-6 feet long. You saw one of those flipping up in the after a fish. It'd be easy to mistake as a monster, and even more than that, it could be a sturgeon. Now, some sturgeons, which they look like a big dinosaur anyway, they can get quite long, 6-7 feet long or even longer, with these huge heads. And if I saw something that looked like this, come up out of the water, I'd probably think it was Loch Ness. It was a Loch Ness monster myself. They are kind of like a monster fish anyway. And I think that a lot of times people are seeing a combination of these things. Well, logs, like I said, logs, birds, strange waves, and sturgeon fish, and maybe a seal every now and then. But the flat fact is, examinations of Loch Ness shows that the fish population, there's not that much fish in Loch Ness. Only about 11 to 12 tons. That's not a lot of fish for a 22-mile long lake. Also, because it's so murky, the food chain just doesn't exist there. There's not enough algae for plankton, which small fish feed on, which larger fish feed on, which is what a Loch Ness monster would have to feed on. So, because of the peat and the lack of sunlight that gets into the water, there's really not enough fish to sustain a population of such sea serpents. Say, like with a plesiosaur, it'd probably take a population of about 30 of them to have a viable breeding population. And there's probably not enough fish in that lake for more than, say, 5 plesiosaurs. And you once again will see them all the time. So let's kind of break all this down, and then and sum it up. Do I now think that there is is there a Loch Ness monster in that lake? Unfortunately, no, I do not. I don't think there's a thing in that lake except maybe some big sturgeons and some eels on occasion, and some strange waves. It's a great story. I think it's something that got started with the Kelpie legends, and then even more into the modern Christian times with the St. Columba story, which probably come out of the Kelpie stories. And that's that one story about that particular lake that made people start seeing things on that lake and saying monster. And I think that oral tradition and that ancient tradition of water creatures, fantastical water creatures, carried on in this Highland lake. And with the modern sightings and the mistaken identities, it's just built it on and on and on. In the long run, I think that Nessie is probably, a myth, a modern urban myth. However, I would love nothing better than to be wrong. But I will say this is one myth that I love, one legend that I love. And I have sworn since I was a little kid that I was going to someday go to Loch Ness. And folks, as I've said on my Big Pretty Man channel, I'm absolutely going to go. In fact, it's my next planned trip to the UK. And I go to the UK about every other year. Only COVID's kept me from going recently. So I think my next big trip is I'm going to finally go to Loch Ness and get my picture taken out on the lake in front of Urquhart Castle. And you know what? As much as I'm convinced there's nothing in that lake, when I get out there, I'm going to look. You're going to be like, okay, yeah, I don't believe there's anything. But what's that over there? It's a lot. No, what? That's a bird. And that's going to be the fun of it. And legends like that and these mysteries like that, in the long run, does it really matter if they're really true or not? Is there anything more fun than an unknown mystery and a legend? And just the possibility that it might be real and you might see it. Well, I hope that I get to too. So I get to see something. And I'll definitely, when I get there, I'll definitely follow up here. So, all right, folks, that's about all I've got for Nessie. And once again, if you're enjoying this channel, please do me a favor and hit this purple chair, and give me subscribe, give me a like, and also if you have any opinions on the Loch Ness Monster, or if you've actually been there and seen the Loch Ness Monster, I would love to hear about that. Leave me a comment below. I would definitely love to hear from you. So you know what? So until next time, find yourself a comfortable chair, get yourself a good book, and you find your passions. Later.